Nicholas Winslow had spent his entire life building an empire, controlling every aspect of his world with precision. Power, wealth, and influence, those were the only things that mattered. But on an ordinary afternoon at an exclusive golf course, everything changed with just 4 simple words from 2 small children. "You're our dad." Standing before him were a boy and a girl, no older than 6, their identical brown eyes staring up at him with a mixture of hope and hesitation. He didn't know their names. He had never seen them before. And yet, something about them felt undeniably familiar. For the first time in his life, Nicholas, ruthless, unstoppable, always in control, felt completely unprepared. Because if what they were saying was true, then his life wasn't just his own anymore. It belonged to them, too. Nicholas Winslow had built his life on precision, control, and absolute certainty. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in surprises. His world revolved around structured meetings, multi-million-dollar deals, and an unshakable routine that kept him at the top. His name carried weight in every boardroom, his influence stretching across industries, making him one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. Golf was one of the few escapes he allowed himself. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a way to clear his mind, to step away from the never-ending demands of his empire. The private course he frequented was exclusive, surrounded by manicured greenery and the quiet hum of luxury. He had played this course dozens of times, and today was supposed to be like any other. As he lined up his next shot, he focused on the ball, blocking out everything else. His grip was firm, his stance perfect, and just as he was about to swing, a small voice cut through the quiet. "Excuse me, sir." Nicholas paused, startled by the unexpected interruption. He turned, expecting to see an employee, perhaps someone from the clubhouse. Instead, standing a few feet away, were 2 small children, a boy and a girl, both around 6 years old. They had identical deep brown eyes and chestnut-colored hair, features so eerily similar it was clear they were siblings. He frowned, confused by their presence. Children weren't usually allowed on the course unless they were guests of members, and he certainly hadn't invited any. He lowered his club and studied them, noting the nervous way they shifted on their feet. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone neutral but firm. The children exchanged a look, and after a brief hesitation, the girl stepped forward, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You're our dad," she said. The words landed like a hammer against his chest, shocking him in a way he hadn't expected. For a moment, he wondered if he had misheard her, but the boy nodded in agreement, his expression just as serious. "You're our dad," he repeated. Nicholas felt the ground shift beneath him. His mind scrambled for a logical explanation. This had to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. Perhaps they had mistaken him for someone else. He had no children. He had never been married, never been in a situation where he would have unknowingly fathered a child. "You must have me confused with someone else," he said carefully, his voice even despite the confusion swirling inside him. "Where are your parents?" The girl's lips pressed together, and the boy looked down at the ground. A heaviness settled between them before the girl spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "Our mom is gone," she said. Nicholas barely registered the words before the boy pulled something from his small backpack. He stepped closer and held out a photograph with small, trembling hands. Nicholas hesitated before taking it. The moment his eyes landed on the image, his breath caught in his throat. It was a photo of him, much younger, smiling beside a woman he once knew all too well. Isabella. Memories came rushing back, hitting him like a tidal wave. He had met Isabella years ago, back when he was still building his career, still climbing his way to the top. Their relationship had been intense but fleeting, ending as quickly as it began. He had left, too focused on his ambition to consider a future with her. He had never known she was pregnant. His gaze snapped back to the children. Their eyes, the shape of their faces, it was undeniable. They were Isabella's. And if they were hers, then they were his. His voice came out rough, almost unsteady. I didn't know. The girl, Sophie, looked at him with an expression far too wise for her age. We know, she said simply. Nicholas felt his grip tighten around the photograph, his carefully constructed world cracking at the edges. He had spent his life planning every move, controlling every variable. But now, standing in the middle of a golf course with two children staring up at him, waiting for a response, he realized something terrifying. For the first time in years, he had absolutely no idea what to do. Nicholas sat in his office, staring at the photograph in his hands as if looking at it long enough would somehow change reality. The past 24 hours had been nothing short of surreal. He had walked onto that golf course expecting nothing more than a quiet afternoon, and instead, he had walked away with the knowledge that he had two 6-year-old children he had never even known existed. Sophie and Liam. Their names echoed in his mind, feeling both foreign and strangely familiar at the same time. He had barely spoken after their revelation, too stunned to formulate a proper response. He had told them to wait while he made a few phone calls, needing time to process what had just happened. But now, sitting alone in his towering office, overlooking the city he had spent years conquering, he realized something unsettling: no amount of wealth, power, or influence could prepare him for this. His assistant, Daniel Grayson, entered the office with his usual efficiency, setting a folder on the desk before taking a measured step back. Daniel had worked for Nicholas long enough to sense when something was wrong, and today, the tension in the air was undeniable. I made a few calls, sir, Daniel said, keeping his voice professional but cautious. Everything checks out. Their mother, Isabella Carter, passed away 3 months ago. Cancer. She was never married, no recorded long-term partners. And as far as I can tell, she never attempted to contact you. Nicholas exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. He had already suspected it was true, but hearing it confirmed made it feel heavier. Isabella had been sick, and he hadn't even known. Had she planned to tell him? Or had she decided he was better off never knowing? Daniel continued, his tone neutral. The children were placed in temporary care with a family friend, but there's no legal guardian assigned to them. If you wanted to contest custody, it wouldn't be difficult. Given your status and resources, you could have full custody within a matter of weeks. Nicholas looked up sharply. Custody? Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. Sir, they have no one else. The courts will look for the closest living relative, and that's you. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, gripping the arms of it as he tried to process the weight of that statement. Custody. Responsibility. Parenthood. None of these were words he had ever associated with himself. He had spent his entire life avoiding attachments, ensuring that nothing and no one could ever slow him down. Now, 2 children had walked into his life and turned that entire philosophy upside down. He wasn't a father. He wasn't built for it. And yet, when he had looked into Sophie's determined eyes and heard Liam's quiet hesitation, something in him had cracked. They had come to him because they had nowhere else to go. They had been waiting for him to reject them, to turn them away like some distant stranger with no obligation to care. Where are they now? Nicholas asked, his voice lower than before. Daniel glanced at his watch. They're still at the hotel suite you arranged for them. I made sure they had everything they needed, clothes, food, whatever they might require for the next few days. Nicholas nodded absently, his mind already elsewhere. He had been so focused on gathering information, on verifying the truth, that he hadn't stopped to consider what those kids were thinking. He had left them in a hotel room with strangers, in an unfamiliar place, after they had just lost the only parent they had ever known. And what had he done? He had gone back to his office, trying to make sense of it in a way that fit neatly into his structured world. It didn't fit. Nothing about this fit. After a long pause, he stood up, grabbing his jacket from the chair. I need to see them, he said, more to himself than to Daniel. Daniel nodded, stepping aside as Nicholas strode toward the elevator. Should I have legal start the custody paperwork? Daniel asked before Nicholas stepped inside. Nicholas hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shook his head. Not yet, he said. I need to figure out what they need from me first. As the elevator doors closed, he let out a slow breath. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know if he could be one. But for the first time in his life, that uncertainty didn't make him run. It made him move forward. Nicholas stepped out of the sleek black car in front of the five-star hotel, his mind still racing as he made his way through the grand lobby. He barely noticed the marble floors, the soft hum of classical music playing in the background, or the murmurs of other guests passing by. His focus was solely on one thing, the two children waiting for him upstairs. He had no idea what he was walking into. He had spent the past few hours trying to process the fact that he had children at all, but now came the real challenge. What was he supposed to say to them? How was he supposed to act? These weren't business negotiations, and they weren't employees he could instruct. They were two 6-year-olds who had just lost their mother, and now they were looking at him as their last remaining hope. As he entered the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor, he clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. He had built his entire life on confidence and control. He could handle billion-dollar deals and high-stakes boardroom battles, yet the thought of facing two children had him more unsettled than he'd ever admit. The elevator doors slid open, and Daniel was already waiting for him in the hallway. Without a word, he led Nicholas to the suite's double doors and gestured for him to go inside. They've been quiet, Daniel said. A little overwhelmed, but they've been taken care of. Nicholas nodded, hesitating for only a second before he pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The suite was spacious, elegantly furnished, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. It was the kind of place most people would be in awe of, but when Nicholas's eyes landed on the two small figures sitting side by side on the couch, he knew that luxury meant nothing to them right now. Sophie and Liam sat close together, their small bodies tense. Sophie had her arms crossed, her little legs swinging slightly as she stared at the floor. Liam clutched a stuffed bear in his hands, his grip tight as if he was holding on to the last bit of familiarity he had left. When they looked up and saw him standing there, a mix of emotions crossed their faces, uncertainty, curiosity, and something deeper. Nicholas cleared his throat, suddenly feeling unprepared. Hey. It wasn't much, but it was the best he could manage. Sophie was the first to speak. You came. There was no accusation in her tone, just a simple observation. As if she hadn't been entirely sure whether he would show up at all. Nicholas took a few steps forward, resisting the urge to shove his hands into his pockets like a nervous teenager. Of course, I did. Liam didn't say anything, but his eyes stayed locked on Nicholas, studying him in a way that made him feel like he was the one being evaluated. After a brief pause, Nicholas sighed and sat down in the armchair across from them. I know this is unexpected, he admitted. For all of us. Sophie tilted her head. You didn't know about us, did you? He could have lied. He could have said something to make himself look better, to avoid the truth. But looking at them, so small yet already carrying the weight of loss, he knew they deserved honesty. No, he said quietly. I didn't know. Liam spoke for the first time. Would you have wanted to? The question hit harder than Nicholas expected. He opened his mouth to answer, but for once in his life, words failed him. The truth was, he didn't know. Would he have stayed if Isabella had told him? Would he have been a father? Or would he have been the same man he was back then, ambitious, focused, and unwilling to slow down for anything? I don't know, he finally admitted. But I know that now, I have a choice. And I want to do this right. Sophie's eyes narrowed slightly. What does that mean? Nicholas ran a hand through his hair. It means I want to get to know you. I want to make sure you're okay. And if you'll let me, I want to figure out what happens next together. Liam looked down at his stuffed bear, tracing a finger over its worn-out fabric. We don't have anywhere else to go. Those words made something tighten in Nicholas's chest. You don't have to, he said, his voice firm. You have me now. The room fell silent, but something in the air shifted. It wasn't instant acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something in between, an unspoken agreement to see where this would lead. Sophie finally sighed, unfolding her arms. I guess we'll see if you're any good at this. Nicholas let out a small, breathless chuckle. I guess we will. For the first time since he had met them, the fear of failure wasn't the thing that terrified him the most. It was the possibility that he might actually want to be a father, and the fact that for the first time in his life, he had something to lose. Nicholas had faced countless challenges in his life, hostile business takeovers, billion-dollar negotiations, and ruthless competitors trying to bring him down. But nothing had prepared him for waking up in the morning knowing that there were now 2 6-year-olds living in his home. After their conversation in the hotel suite, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to let them stay in a hotel indefinitely, and he certainly wasn't going to let them feel like they were temporary guests. So, without hesitation, he had brought them to his penthouse, a place that, up until now, had been his sanctuary. The next morning, as he walked into the kitchen, he realized just how much his life had changed in less than 24 hours. Normally, his mornings were quiet and controlled. He'd wake up, have his coffee prepared by his housekeeper, glance at the financial reports on his tablet, and mentally prepare for the day. But today, the kitchen was anything but quiet. Sophie sat at the counter, legs swinging as she ate a piece of toast, her curly brown hair sticking up in wild directions. Liam was next to her, his eyes still heavy with sleep, but his little fingers clutched a spoon as he lazily stirred a bowl of cereal. His stuffed bear sat beside his plate, as if it needed breakfast too. Nicholas stood in the doorway, momentarily unsure of what to do. Sophie was the first to notice him. Morning, she said through a mouthful of toast. Liam didn't look up, still more focused on his cereal than on Nicholas's presence. Nicholas cleared his throat. Morning. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to sit with them. He wasn't used to this. He could close a billion-dollar deal in under an hour, but he had no idea what the protocol was for breakfast with kids. Sophie studied him with a knowing look, as if she could tell he was completely out of his element. You don't eat breakfast? She asked. Nicholas hesitated before walking to the coffee maker. I usually just have coffee. Sophie made a face. That's boring. Liam finally looked up. Coffee's gross. Nicholas smirked. It is when you're 6. Sophie set her toast down and leaned forward. So, what now? Nicholas turned to face them, gripping his coffee mug as if it could give him answers. Now, we figure things out. I've already spoken to my team about school options for you both, and we'll make sure you have everything you need. Liam frowned. We already went to school. I know, Nicholas said. But that was before. You're here now, and I want to make sure you're somewhere safe, somewhere you feel comfortable. Sophie tilted her head. Are we staying? The question hung in the air longer than it should have. Nicholas could see it in their eyes. They were waiting for reassurance, waiting to hear that they weren't just passing through his life. He knew what they needed to hear, but the weight of those words felt heavier than anything he had ever carried before. Yes, he said finally. You're staying. Sophie smiled slightly, but Liam didn't react right away. Instead, he pushed his cereal bowl aside and looked down at his bear. What if you change your mind? Liam asked quietly. Nicholas set his coffee down and walked over, crouching so he was at the boy's eye level. I won't. Liam still didn't look convinced. You didn't know about us before. What if you decide you don't want us now? Nicholas felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had spent his whole life making promises in business, and he had never once made a deal he wasn't sure he could keep. But this was different. This wasn't about contracts or negotiations. This was about trust, something that had clearly been broken before. He took a slow breath. I didn't know about you before, and I can't change that. But I know about you now. And I'm not going anywhere. Liam finally met his gaze, searching his face for any sign of dishonesty. Whatever he saw must have been enough, because after a long pause, he gave a small nod and pulled his stuffed bear closer. Nicholas stood up, feeling an unfamiliar weight in his chest. Responsibility. It wasn't something he had ever wanted before, but now it was staring him right in the face. Sophie broke the silence. So, if we're staying, does that mean we get our own rooms? Nicholas chuckled. Of course. I already have people setting them up. Sophie grinned. Cool. Can mine be purple? Nicholas raised an eyebrow. Purple. Yeah, she said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. It's my favorite color. Nicholas smirked. Noted. Sophie picked up her toast again. And we should probably get a dog too. Nicholas choked on his coffee. Let's take this one step at a time. Sophie giggled, while Liam finally cracked a tiny smile. It wasn't much, but it was something. Nicholas exhaled, realizing that this was just the beginning. He had built his entire life on power, control, and wealth, but none of that mattered here. What mattered was sitting in front of him, two kids who were now his responsibility, whether he was ready for it or not. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about his next business move. He was thinking about what it meant to be a father. Nicholas had always prided himself on being a man who could adapt to any situation. No challenge was too great, no problem too complex. He had spent years building an empire by making quick, decisive moves, always staying one step ahead of everyone else. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the chaos that came with having two 6-year-olds in his home. The morning after their first breakfast together, he had expected the day to go smoothly. He had arranged meetings to discuss their schooling, hired a professional to oversee their needs, and even ensured that their rooms were being designed exactly how they wanted. He had thought that covering logistics would be enough, that structure and organization would make things easier. But by the afternoon, he realized how badly he had underestimated what it truly meant to have children in his life. His penthouse, which had always been an oasis of order and precision, now felt like it belonged to someone else. Sophie had somehow managed to turn his living room into an art studio, with crayons and papers scattered across his expensive marble coffee table. Liam, on the other hand, had discovered the smart home system and was now pressing buttons on the wall panel, adjusting the lighting and temperature just to see what would happen. Every few seconds, the room shifted from warm to cold, from dim to blindingly bright. Nicholas rubbed his temples, watching as his once pristine space descended into mild chaos. Sophie, do you have to spread everything out on the table? He asked, eyeing the mess of drawings in front of her. Sophie looked up, unfazed. I'm making a picture for you. That made him pause. He hadn't expected that. For me? She nodded, holding up a sheet of paper with a drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall, 2 short. At the top, in large, uneven letters, she had written, "Our new family." Nicholas stared at the drawing, his throat tightening in a way he didn't expect. He wasn't sure what to say. Before he could respond, Liam called out from across the room. Hey, what does this button do? Nicholas turned just in time to see the living room blinds suddenly rise, then lower again, then rise once more in rapid succession. Liam, fascinated by the effect, pressed the button again. Liam, Nicholas said, keeping his voice level. Stop pressing random buttons. Liam hesitated, then looked at him with an innocent expression. Why? It's fun. Nicholas sighed, walking over to the panel and disabling the controls. Because I don't want my penthouse turning into a light show. Liam frowned slightly. It's too quiet in here. Nicholas arched a brow. I thought kids liked quiet. Not really, Sophie chimed in. Our old house was always noisy. Mom would sing while she cooked, and we had a dog that barked at everything. It was fun. Nicholas wasn't sure how to respond to that. His home had always been quiet, too quiet, maybe. It had never felt empty before, but now, standing here with them, he wondered if it always had been. After a brief silence, Sophie changed the subject. So, when do we start school? Nicholas took a seat on the couch, deciding that if he was going to get used to this, he might as well try to relax. I'm looking into a few options. It needs to be a school that fits both of you. Liam looked skeptical. Do we have to go to a fancy school? Nicholas smirked. Would that be a problem? Liam shrugged. I don't know. We've never been to a fancy school before. Nicholas leaned back, realizing that the idea of luxury, which had always been normal to him, was completely foreign to them. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be good. Sophie tapped her pencil against the table. Will you take us there? On the first day? Nicholas hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. I'll take you. She seemed satisfied with that, returning to her drawing. Liam, however, still seemed hesitant. Nicholas could tell there was something on his mind. What is it? Nicholas asked. Liam fiddled with the stuffed bear in his lap before looking up. Are we staying for real? Or just for now? The question made Nicholas pause. He could tell that, despite their playful attitudes, both of them were waiting for the moment he would decide this was all too much and send them away. It made something inside him tighten. You're staying, he said firmly. For real. Liam studied him for a long moment before giving a small nod, as if testing whether he could believe him. Sophie, on the other hand, smiled. Good. Because I already started decorating my room in my head. Nicholas chuckled, shaking his head. Of course you did. As the day went on, the chaos didn't lessen, but something else settled into place, something Nicholas hadn't realized he had been missing. The laughter, the energy, the small but significant moments of connection. His world had been built around control, but these two kids had entered his life and shattered every wall he had built around himself. And instead of trying to fix it, he found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, he was okay with letting it stay that way. Nicholas had spent years believing that control was the key to success. His life had been carefully structured, every decision calculated, every move deliberate. Yet, in just a few days, two 6-year-olds had completely dismantled that control. He wasn't sure whether to be frustrated or impressed by how effortlessly Sophie and Liam had forced their way into his world, not with demands or expectations, but simply by existing in a way that made it impossible for him to ignore them. That morning, he woke up to the sound of muffled giggles coming from down the hall. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but as he sat up in bed and listened more closely, the sound became clearer. It was followed by the distinct shuffle of small feet and then, suspicious silence. Nicholas sighed, rubbing a hand over his face before getting out of bed. He hadn't needed an alarm clock since Sophie and Liam had moved in. His once quiet mornings had been replaced with a new kind of unpredictability, and as much as he wanted to pretend it irritated him, the truth was, he didn't mind as much as he thought he would. Pulling on a robe, he stepped out of his bedroom and followed the faint whispering down the hallway. The noise was coming from the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway and took in the scene in front of him. Sophie and Liam stood by the kitchen island, their backs turned to him as they huddled over something. The countertop was covered in flour, sugar, and what looked like a spilled bottle of syrup. Liam was holding a measuring cup, his small fingers gripping it tightly as he tried to pour something into a mixing bowl. Sophie was beside him, her expression focused as she cracked an egg, badly. Half of the shell fell into the bowl, and instead of removing it, she just stirred it in. Nicholas crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. Do I even want to know what's happening here? Both children jumped at the sound of his voice. Sophie whirled around first, her expression shifting between guilt and excitement. Liam turned next, his eyes wide like he had just been caught in the middle of committing a crime. We're making breakfast, Sophie announced proudly. Nicholas arched a brow. Are you? Liam looked down at the mess in front of him, then back up at Nicholas. We were trying to. Nicholas exhaled, stepping forward to inspect the damage. The pancakes, or whatever they were supposed to be, looked like a disaster, the batter a lumpy mess. The stovetop was off, which meant they hadn't attempted to actually cook anything yet, and for that, Nicholas was grateful. He rubbed his temples. Let me get this straight. Instead of just waiting for breakfast, you decided to destroy my kitchen. Sophie put her hands on her hips. It's not destroyed. We're just experimenting. Nicholas couldn't help the small smirk that tugged at his lips. He should have been annoyed. He should have been lecturing them about making a mess and not playing with things they didn't know how to use. But instead, he found himself staring at them, at their eager expressions, at the way Liam kept fidgeting with his measuring cup like he was still determined to get it right. He sighed, shaking his head. All right, move over. Sophie frowned. Why? Because if you're going to make breakfast in my kitchen, you're at least going to do it right, Nicholas said, rolling up his sleeves. Liam's eyes widened. You know how to cook. Nicholas smirked. Surprised? Sophie nodded. You don't look like someone who cooks. Nicholas let out a low chuckle. I don't do it often, but I know enough. He reached for the mixing bowl, grimacing slightly at the consistency. Okay, first of all, you don't just crack eggs and leave the shells in. Sophie shrugged. They're small. No one would notice. Nicholas gave her a pointed look before carefully fishing out the pieces of eggshell. Trust me. They would. For the next 20 minutes, he guided them through the process properly, showing them how to mix the ingredients, how to pour just the right amount of batter into the pan, and how to flip a pancake without destroying it. At first, they were skeptical, but as the pancake started to take shape, they got more excited. When Liam successfully flipped his first pancake without dropping it, he grinned up at Nicholas. I did it. Nicholas nodded approvingly. Not bad. Sophie, not wanting to be left behind, quickly flipped hers, only for it to land half off the pan. She huffed. Mine's broken. Nicholas smirked. It's still edible. Sophie frowned, then looked at the misshapen pancake. Yeah. I guess it just looks unique. Let's call it creative cooking, Nicholas said. Once the pancakes were finally done, they sat at the kitchen island together, plates stacked high with syrup-drenched food. It wasn't perfect. The pancakes were uneven, some were slightly burnt, and there was still flour dusting the countertops. But when Sophie took her first bite and smiled, and when Liam eagerly dug into his plate, Nicholas felt something he hadn't expected. This moment, this small, chaotic, completely unplanned morning, felt real. It wasn't business. It wasn't strategy. It was just them, figuring things out together. Sophie looked at him between bites. So, do we get to cook again? Nicholas raised an eyebrow. If you promise not to turn my kitchen into a disaster zone, maybe. Liam grinned. So, probably not. Nicholas sighed, shaking his head with a smirk. Yeah. Probably not. As they finished their breakfast, he realized something. He had spent years building a life that revolved around success, wealth, and discipline. But in this moment, sitting with two kids who had somehow become the most unexpected part of his world, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was what life was really supposed to be about. Nicholas had always believed that change was something you controlled. In business, he was the one who made the decisions, the one who dictated the terms. He strategized, planned, and ensured that every move he made was deliberate. But this wasn't something he had planned for. Sophie and Liam had entered his life like a storm, turning everything upside down, and yet, somehow, he wasn't trying to fix it. He wasn't looking for an escape. He was learning, slowly but surely, how to adjust. A week after they had moved in, Nicholas decided it was time to take them out. He wasn't entirely sure why it felt like such a big deal, but something inside him told him it was necessary. They had been cooped up in his penthouse, adjusting to a life they had never known before, and he figured they needed a break. He picked them up from their rooms that Saturday morning, finding Sophie sprawled across her bed reading a book and Liam sitting on the floor, quietly building something out of Legos. "Get dressed," Nicholas told them. "We're going out." Sophie sat up instantly, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Where?" Nicholas smirked. "You'll see." Liam looked hesitant, glancing at Sophie before standing up slowly. "Is it a fancy place?" Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "Do you want it to be?" Liam shook his head. "Not really." "Then no. Just wear whatever you're comfortable in." It was a strange thing, watching them interact with the world outside of the carefully controlled environment he had created for them. He took them to a park, a large one, filled with families, laughter, and the kind of chaotic energy that had always been foreign to him. He had never spent time in places like this before, never had a reason to, but as he watched Sophie run ahead, her excitement evident in every movement, he realized how unfamiliar this was not just for them, but for him as well. Liam was more reserved, sticking close to Nicholas's side as they walked along the winding paths. The boy was cautious, always observing, always thinking before he acted. Nicholas recognized that trait. It was something he had mastered himself over the years, the ability to analyze a situation before engaging. "You don't have to stay right next to me the whole time," Nicholas said after a few minutes. Liam shrugged. "I don't know what to do." Nicholas exhaled, realizing that for a kid who had spent his life in a much smaller, more familiar world, this kind of freedom might have felt overwhelming. "Then let's figure it out," Nicholas said, scanning the park. His eyes landed on a small stand where they were renting out kites. He smirked. "Ever flown a kite before?" Liam shook his head, watching as Nicholas walked over and handed the man a bill before receiving a bright blue kite with a long tail. He walked back to Liam, kneeling slightly as he held it out. "Want to try?" Liam hesitated before slowly taking the string. Nicholas helped him adjust his grip before gesturing to the open field. "All right. You run, and when the wind catches it, let it go." Liam frowned. "What if it doesn't work?" Nicholas smirked. "Then we try again." It took a few tries, some frustrated sighs, a few moments of doubt, but then, suddenly, the kite lifted, catching the breeze as Liam's grip tightened around the string. His eyes widened, his mouth parting slightly in awe as he watched it rise higher and higher. Nicholas stood beside him, hands in his pockets, watching the boy's face more than the kite itself. "Not bad," he said. Liam grinned, and for the first time since they had met, Nicholas saw a spark of confidence in his eyes. They spent hours at the park. Sophie found a group of kids playing tag and immediately joined in, her laughter echoing across the open space. Liam continued flying the kite, growing more comfortable with every passing minute. Nicholas stayed nearby, observing, making sure they were okay, but something unexpected settled in his chest, a sense of contentment he hadn't felt in years. When the sun started to set, they got ice cream from a small vendor near the entrance of the park. Sophie picked strawberry, Liam chose chocolate, and Nicholas, after some light-hearted pressure from Sophie, went with vanilla. They sat on a bench, the kids eating their ice cream while Nicholas simply took in the moment. Sophie looked up at him after a while, her eyes thoughtful. You don't smile a lot, do you? Nicholas raised an eyebrow. I smile. Liam shook his head. Not really. Nicholas exhaled, taking a small bite of his ice cream. I guess I just never had a reason to. Sophie tilted her head. And now? Nicholas met her gaze, then looked at Liam, who was focused on his ice cream but listening intently. Now, Nicholas said slowly, I think I might be figuring it out. Sophie grinned before finishing the last of her cone. Good. Because I think you'd look better if you smiled more. Nicholas chuckled, shaking his head. I'll keep that in mind. As they walked back to the car, Sophie skipping ahead and Liam staying close, Nicholas realized something. This was what life was supposed to feel like, not just success, not just power, but this. Moments that didn't need to be controlled, moments that simply existed, full of laughter, warmth, and the unexpected feeling of belonging. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't just building something for himself. He was building something for them, too. Nicholas had never been the type of man to reflect on the past. His entire life had been built around forward motion, always moving, always striving, always reaching for the next goal. Looking back had never served him. It was a waste of time, a distraction. But now, sitting in his home, watching Sophie and Liam argue over what movie to watch, he found himself thinking about all the moments that had led him here. It had been a month since they had come into his life. A month since he had looked into two pairs of familiar brown eyes and realized that everything he thought he knew about his world had changed. He had spent his entire life believing he didn't need anyone, that attachments only made things complicated. Yet, here he was, no longer living for himself but for two little people who had managed to unravel every part of him without even trying. Why can't we just watch both? Liam asked, exasperated as Sophie held two DVD cases in her hands, her expression stubborn. Because The Lion King is way better than Toy Story, Sophie argued, waving the case in front of Liam's face. No, it's not, Liam shot back. Woody and Buzz are awesome. Nicholas, who had been quietly observing their back and forth, finally sighed. Flip a coin. Sophie and Liam turned to him at the same time. What? Sophie asked. Nicholas pulled a coin from his pocket and held it up. Heads for The Lion King, tails for Toy Story. Sophie narrowed her eyes. And we both have to agree to go with whatever wins? Nicholas nodded. That's how decisions work. You don't always get what you want, but at least it's fair. Liam crossed his arms. Fine. Nicholas flipped the coin, catching it in his palm before turning it over on the back of his hand. Tails, he announced. Liam grinned in victory while Sophie groaned dramatically, flopping onto the couch. Ugh, fine. But I get to pick next time. Nicholas smirked. That's fair. As Liam put the movie in, Nicholas glanced at Sophie, who was still sulking. He nudged her foot with his. Hey. You okay? She huffed. Yeah. I just hate losing. Nicholas chuckled. Yeah, I can relate. Sophie peeked up at him, her lips twitching into a small smile. You lose a lot. Nicholas exhaled. Not anymore. But when I was younger, I did. I hated it, too. Sophie sat up a little. What did you lose at? Nicholas hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about his past. No one ever asked about it, and he had never volunteered the information. But as Sophie looked at him, genuinely curious, and Liam settled onto the couch nearby, waiting for the movie to start, he found himself answering. I wasn't always the best at everything, Nicholas admitted. When I was your age, I wasn't the smartest or the fastest. There were a lot of things I wasn't good at. And every time I failed, I told myself I had to work harder. That if I worked hard enough, no one would ever beat me again. Sophie tilted her head. And did it work? Nicholas smirked. Depends on how you look at it. I stopped losing, but I also stopped playing games just for fun. Winning became the only thing that mattered. Sophie considered that for a moment, then shrugged. That sounds kinda boring. Nicholas chuckled. Yeah, it was. Liam spoke up from his spot on the couch. So you don't care about winning anymore? Nicholas met his eyes. I still care. But I've learned that some things are more important. Sophie grinned. Like us? Nicholas felt something in his chest tighten. He had spent years mastering the art of keeping people at a distance, of making sure no one ever got close enough to matter. But these two had come into his life and destroyed that wall without even trying. Yeah, he said quietly. Like you. Sophie's smile widened before she turned back to the screen, satisfied. Liam didn't say anything, but he glanced at Nicholas with something that looked a lot like understanding. As the movie started, Nicholas leaned back into the couch, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known he needed. He had spent his entire life believing that his purpose was to build an empire, to be the best, to win at all costs. But now, as he sat between two kids who had somehow become his entire world, he realized that these small, everyday moments, were the ones that truly mattered. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing something bigger. He wasn't looking ahead to the next challenge. For the first time, he was exactly where he wanted to be. The ending of this story is powerful because it doesn't rely on grand gestures or dramatic twists, it's meaningful in its simplicity. Nicholas Winslow starts as a man who defines himself by his success, his wealth, and his ability to control everything in his life. But as the story unfolds, he's forced to confront a truth he never expected: real fulfillment doesn't come from power or financial dominance, but from the connections we build with others. What makes this transformation so compelling is that it doesn't happen overnight. Nicholas doesn't suddenly become a perfect father, and Sophie and Liam don't immediately trust him. Their relationship develops through small moments, shared breakfasts, movie nights, and learning how to exist together. These seemingly ordinary experiences are what truly change him, showing him that love, trust, and family aren't things that can be controlled or negotiated, they have to be earned. By the final chapter, Nicholas isn't just a man who has accepted his role as a father, he wants to be one. That's the biggest shift. He no longer sees Sophie and Liam as an obligation or an unexpected disruption to his well-structured life. Instead, he recognizes that they are what make his life complete. The man who once lived only for the next deal now finds meaning in moments as simple as flipping a coin for a movie or watching a child's face light up after flying a kite. This ending is satisfying because it feels real. Nicholas doesn't magically become someone else, but he grows in a way that feels genuine and earned. The story leaves us with a sense of hope, proving that change isn't about losing who you are, it's about discovering who you were always meant to be.